Alright, so now that we're starting into the actual welding symbology, a couple of things to understand is that a weld symbol on a set of plans, however it's given, is unique to that particular weld. So for example, a set of plans will have unique information for that one weld condition and then unique information for some other weld condition somewhere else. Otherwise, we would just throw a bunch of notes on there and that'll be it. So don't take anything for granted. Don't assume that because one weld has a certain specification on it that you're going to do it every single time unless you see something like TYP, which stands for typical, and that does imply that it's being used more than that one instance. But for the most part, you always have to be cautious and not make assumptions about that. A weld symbol essentially is going to be broken down into several characteristics, or several components. First of all, you're going to have the arrow, and we're going to take a look at the imagery here in a second. A reference line. You're going to have a weld symbol. And I know you're saying, well, I thought we were talking about weld symbols. Well, the weld symbol is actually a component of a weld symbol. Dimensions. And supplementary symbols or specifications, other stuff that's going to be attached to the weld symbol that tells you other things to go with. Let's start off with some of the basic. And my apology for the angle on the screen. It's a little bit off on our scanning process, but you know, you're going to get the idea. Let's start off with the arrow. Okay. So here we go. This right here is our arrow. Makes sense. We've often referred to this kind of thing on a set of plans as a leader as well, but it basically points to what we're, or I shouldn't say what we're going to weld, but it points to in the general connection point or location of the joint of what we're going to weld. Another key thing about the arrow, and specifically the arrowhead, is the objective of that arrowhead is to touch the object line. Now, previously we've learned a little bit about what object lines are. Those are your surfaces, and typically object lines form a joint. And the arrowhead is supposed to just touch that. It's not supposed to be below or above or overlapping. It's supposed to just touch the object line in question so that it's very, very clear what joint we're dealing with. Now, our reference line, which is this horizontal line right here, attached to the arrow, is a crucial component in terms of what it represents. What is, let me say it this way, what is above the reference line and what is below the reference line. One of the most common things that people will make mistakes on is misinterpreting the information provided up here versus what's provided down here. And what we're meaning to say is information down here means that it's occurring on the arrow side, and information up here is occurring on the other side of what the arrow is making contact with. Let's look at a graph. Okay, so this brings it down pretty well for us. First off, again, with the reference line, let me use the right button here, the reference line, you have what's on top was considered the other side, what's on below or below the reference line is considered on the arrow side. So let's take a look at a quick example. For this particular case, I can get this, oh, I can't get this scroll up to just escape out of that thing. There we go. In this particular case, this represents, hang on. A weld has occurred right here, okay? When you see, let's say, of course there's no weld symbol at this point in time, but let's say that the arrow is actually touching, the weld symbol is actually looking like this. What this essentially means is that this information would be on the arrow side. So for example, if the weld symbol said do a fillet weld on, and it was located below the reference line, this is where we would weld. If the information was referenced up here, then it would be on the other side, which would be on the back of the part. If information is on both top and bottom, it means whatever weld information is provided, you have to do it on both sides. So assuming, you know, whichever location your arrow is, you then pay attention to where your actual information is, above the reference line or below. Let's take a look a little bit down, shall we? This actually will probably bring it into pretty good meaning. Here's your symbol, or here's your reference line. Here's your arrowhead. Note the arrow is touching right here on this object line connection between this surface and this surface. The symbol or the information is on the bottom of the reference line or below the reference line, which means it is which side? It is the arrow side, which means it is going to occur wherever the arrow touches. So, for example, this is a fillet weld symbol, and a fillet weld is provided on this side of the connection. Now, let's look at the other side. Notice it's the same arrowhead, it's the same reference line, but the symbol for the weld is above the reference line, which means it's on the other side. So physically, even though the arrow is over here, the weld is going to occur over here. That's one of the crucial things to understand with weld symbols, is the fact that there is above and below the reference line means it may not occur where the arrow points. A lot of times it would be great if all drawings had it where the arrow just touched where you're going to weld and that was it. But the fact is, it's just not the case. Sometimes you have to really pay attention to, is the weld going to be over here, even though the actual arrow is in one of the places. So one of the crucial things about the reference line is that right there. Make sure you have a pretty good grasp of that, and plus we'll have plenty of assignments to kind of work with. But when in doubt, check out some also extra YouTube videos. There's some great little animations on which side is which. Now, in specific cases, or sort of unique cases, I should say, let's see if I can get her down here. Here we go. You can have scenarios where you're actually dealing with, flip it over here. You can have situations where you're dealing with a symbol or an arrow that is referring to two different references. So for example, for this butt joint, let's say we're going to do a weld. And here comes my arrow, here comes my reference line, and let's just say, for example, we're going to do one type of process. We won't get into the process just yet, but then the line comes up and does this little number. And we have another symbol, which implies that we're going to do two different processes at the same connection point. Now, question number one, is this one going to be on the arrow side or the opposite side? And here's your options. This is the 1 and 2. Which one is this operation technically meaning it's going to occur, side 1 or side 2? Well, the answer is side 1, because it is it's below the reference line, and therefore it is on the arrow side. Note this one, however, is above the reference line, which means on the other side, so its process is going to occur on this location. Okay? Now, what's also interesting about this particular little situation is that you have two processes in sequence. Now, which one gets done first? It's whichever one is closest to the arrow. Since this process is clearly closer to the arrow than this process, it is obvious that this process is going to be the first one to occur, and then this one's going to be the next one to occur. Now, to be fair, I've not seen this application done on a lot of set of prints before, but it's probably something new that people are trying out to kind of get through the process, or maybe I just never dealt with it before. It is interesting, and of course, if you will think back to our previous lecture, what we're dealing with is a back weld scenario. And that is implying the fact that this is occurring after the original groove weld, which is called a back weld, not a backing weld. So that's a lot of information just represented by this one horizontal line, but the crucial thing is your information above or below, and where does it occur? Alright, so that's a good stopping point before our next one, our actual one dealing with the weld symbols themselves. So a good chance for a break and a thought process, so we'll see you next time. Or on the next one.